She poured wine on a 7-month pregnant woman, twice, in front of 50 witnesses. And my husband, he stood there and watched. Then he froze my bank accounts, changed the locks on our home, filed divorce papers calling me mentally unstable. He thought he had won. He thought I would crumble. But here's what he didn't know. I was never the victim. I was the trap. And my brother, he wasn't coming to save me. He was coming to collect the evidence I had been gathering for months. If this satisfies your soul, hit like and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. The moment Sloan Whitmore poured that wine on me, she thought she was humiliating a helpless pregnant woman. What she did not know was that I had been recording everything for 3 months. And my brother, he was not just coming to rescue me. He was coming to collect the evidence I had been gathering since the day I found the burner phone in my husband's golf bag. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to that evening, to the moment I stepped through the doors of Belle Vista restaurant in Manhattan, 7 months pregnant and wearing a cream-colored dress I had chosen specifically because I knew how wine would look against it, red against white, blood against innocence. The perfect visual for what I needed the world to see. The chandeliers cast their golden light across marble floors and tables dressed in white linen. Soft piano music drifted through the air, mingling with quiet conversations in the gentle clink of crystal glasses. This was the kind of place where reservations required connections, where a single bottle of wine cost more than most people's monthly rent, where powerful men made deals that shaped the lives of thousands. My husband, Garrett Ashford III, loved places like this. He loved the way people looked at him when he walked through the door. He loved the way waiters rushed to attend to his every need. He loved the power that radiated from every tailored thread of his custom suits. What he did not love was me. Not anymore. Maybe he never did. I paused near the entrance, one hand resting on my rounded belly. The baby kicked, a small flutter of movement that reminded me why I was doing this, why I had spent 3 months pretending to be oblivious, why I had smiled through dinners where my husband barely looked at me, why I had swallowed my pride every time I found traces of her perfume on his shirts. The hostess approached with a practiced smile. "Mrs. Ashford, your husband is already seated. Right this way." I followed her through the restaurant, acutely aware of every detail. The security cameras positioned in the corners, the wealthy patrons who would serve as witnesses, the emergency exits I had memorized from the floor plan I studied last week. 3 months ago, I would have walked into this restaurant as Madeline Ashford, dutiful wife, former journalist who had given up her career for the man she loved. Tonight, I walked in as someone else entirely, someone with a plan. The small recording device hidden in my necklace captured every sound. It was a gift from my journalism days, a piece of technology that had helped me break stories about corporate fraud and political corruption. My husband thought I had sold all my old equipment when I stopped working. He was wrong about a lot of things. I spotted him before he saw me. Garrett sat at a corner table, leaning close to a woman in a red silk dress, Sloan Whitmore. Art gallery owner, social climber, the woman who had been sleeping with my husband for the past 18 months. They looked so comfortable together, so natural. His hand rested on the table near hers, not quite touching, but close enough to suggest intimacy. She laughed at something he said, tossing her perfectly styled blonde hair over one shoulder. For a moment, just a moment, the old Madeline surfaced. The one who wanted to run away, the one who wanted to pretend she had not seen what she had clearly seen, the one who still, despite everything, felt the sharp sting of betrayal. Then the baby kicked again, harder this time, and I remembered who I had become. I straightened my spine and walked toward their table. My heels clicked against the marble floor, a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet restaurant. Heads turned, conversations paused. Everyone sensed that something was about to happen. Garrett looked up. For a split second, something flickered across his face. Annoyance, fear, but he recovered quickly, arranging his features into a mask of polite surprise. "Madeline," he said, his voice carrying the smooth charm he used in business negotiations. "I did not expect you so early." Sloane's expression was harder to read. She smiled, but her eyes were cold, calculating. She had known I was coming. Of course she had. This was her territory now. I smiled back, keeping my voice light and pleasant. I finished my appointment early. I hope I am not interrupting anything. The tension at the table was thick enough to cut with one of Belle Vista's sterling silver knives. Garrett shifted in his seat. Sloane's smile grew sharper, more predatory. What they did not know, what they could not possibly know, was that I had sent my brother Declan a package yesterday, a flash drive containing bank statements, recorded phone calls, and documentation of every lie Garrett had told me for the past 2 years. Declan and I had been estranged for 3 years ever since my wedding. He had tried to warn me about Garrett. I had not listened. I had accused him of being overprotective, of not wanting me to be happy, of trying to control my life. I was wrong, and now I needed him. The package contained a letter, a simple message that I knew would bring him running. You were right about everything. I need your help. Please forgive me. I did not know if he would come, but I had to try, because tonight and everything was going to change. Either I would walk out of this restaurant with the evidence I needed to destroy Garrett, or he would destroy me first. I pulled out a chair and sat down across from my husband and his mistress, my hands still resting protectively on my belly. So I said pleasantly, "What are we celebrating?" The silence that followed my question stretched for exactly 4 seconds. I counted them, the way I had learned to count during my journalism days. 4 seconds was the average time it took for someone caught off guard to formulate a lie. Garrett recovered first. We were just discussing the gallery opening next month. Sloane's new exhibition. How wonderful. I turned to Sloane, keeping my expression warm and curious. What is the theme? She studied me with those cold blue eyes, searching for some sign that I knew the truth. I gave her nothing. After years of marriage to a master manipulator, I had learned a few tricks myself. Female empowerment, Sloane said smoothly. Women who have overcome obstacles to achieve their dreams. I felt a hysterical laugh building in my chest, but swallowed it down. The irony was almost too perfect. That sounds fascinating, I said. I would love to attend the opening. Garrett's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Actually, I was thinking you might want to rest that week. The baby will be due soon, and you have been looking tired lately. Looking tired. His favorite way of telling me I look terrible without actually saying the words. I smiled. I feel wonderful. Actually, better than I have in months. That was true. There was something liberating about having a plan, about knowing that every word, every interaction, every moment of humiliation was bringing me closer to freedom. A waiter approached our table, and Garrett ordered a bottle of wine without consulting either of us. When the wine arrived, he poured glasses for himself and Sloane, deliberately ignoring me. None for Madeline, Sloane asked with mock concern. Oh, that is right. The pregnancy. She made the word sound like a disease. I pressed my hand against my belly again. No, thank you. I need to take care of myself and the baby. Something shifted in Sloane's expression, a flash of something ugly beneath the polished exterior. She lifted her wine glass and took a slow sip, her eyes never leaving mine. Tell me what time you are watching this and where you are tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We would love to hear from you. It must be difficult, she said, setting down her glass. Being pregnant at your age? What are you now, 34, 35, 32? I said calmly. She smiled that sharp smile again. Still, first pregnancies after 30 can be so risky. I am sure you are worried. I am not worried, I said. My doctor says everything is progressing normally. Sloane leaned back in her chair, crossing one leg over the other. Her red silk dress caught the candlelight, shimmering like flames. Of course, I am sure Garrett takes excellent care of you. The double meaning in her words was unmistakable. I felt Garrett's gaze on me, waiting to see how I would react, waiting for me to crumble. He does. I said simply, and I take care of myself. For a moment, something flickered across Sloane's face. Frustration. Perhaps. She had expected me to be easier to break. The appetizers arrived, and conversation shifted to safer topics. The stock market, a mutual acquaintance's divorce, the latest political scandal. I participated when appropriate, laughed at the right moments, and pretended not to notice the way Garrett's hand occasionally brushed against Sloane's beneath the table. The recording device in my necklace captured everything. Every word, every innuendo, every subtle cruelty. When the main course was cleared, I excused myself to use the restroom. As I walked away from the table, I felt their eyes on my back. I knew they were already talking about me, already plotting. Let them plot. I had plans of my own. The restroom was mercifully empty. I stood in front of the mirror, studying my reflection. The cream dress fell elegantly over my pregnant belly. My dark hair was pulled back in a simple style. I looked exactly like what they expected me to be. A naive, trusting wife who had no idea her world was about to collapse. I took a deep breath and adjusted my necklace, making sure the recording device was still positioned correctly. Then I straightened my shoulders and walked back into the restaurant. I did not make it to the table. Sloane intercepted me halfway across the room. She had a wine glass in her hand, the deep red liquid swirling slowly as she walked. "Madeline," she said, her voice carrying just enough for nearby diners to hear. "I just wanted to tell you something before you sit back down." I stopped, sensing danger but refusing to show fear. "What is that?" She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume, close enough that I could see the malice burning in her eyes. "You should not have come here tonight," she said softly. "This is not your world anymore." And then she lifted the wine glass and poured. The red liquid cascaded down the front of my cream dress, spreading across the fabric like a blood stain. It soaked through to my skin, cold and shocking. I staggered backward, my hands flying instinctively to protect my belly. Gasps erupted around the room. Silverware clattered. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Every eye in the restaurant turned toward us. Sloane stood before me with an expression of pure satisfaction. "Oh my goodness," she said loudly, her voice dripping with false concern. "How clumsy of me. I am so sorry. You must have bumped into me." I stared at her, genuinely shocked despite all my preparations. I had expected cruelty. I had expected manipulation. But this level of public humiliation was beyond even what I had imagined. The wine dripped from my dress onto the marble floor. My baby shifted inside me, responding to my sudden spike of stress. I pressed my hands more firmly against my belly, whispering silent reassurances. Across the room, Garrett watched without moving, without intervening, without showing the slightest concern for his pregnant wife standing in a puddle of wine. And that, more than anything Sloane had done, told me exactly who my husband really was. The restaurant remained frozen in horrified silence. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, watching, waiting to see what I would do. Some faces showed pity. Others showed morbid curiosity. A few people had raised their phones, pretending to check messages while clearly recording the scene. Good. I needed witnesses. I needed documentation. Even if every second of this humiliation felt like acid eating through my skin. A waitress approached cautiously, a white napkin clutched in her trembling hands. "Ma'am, can I help you?" Her name tag read Susan. She looked young, maybe 22, with kind brown eyes that reflected genuine concern. In that moment, she was the only person in the room who seemed to see me as a human being rather than a spectacle. "Thank you," I said quietly, accepting the napkin. "But I do not think this will be enough." Sloane laughed, the sound cutting through the silence like glass shattering. "Drama queen," she muttered, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "This is exactly why Garrett said you should have stayed home." I looked past her to my husband. He stood a few feet away, having finally left the table, but he made no move to come closer. His expression was not concern or anger or even embarrassment. It was irritation. Garrett walked toward me, each step measured and controlled. When he reached me, he leaned in close, his voice low but sharp. "What are you doing here?" "Madeline," I felt something crack inside me. After everything that had just happened, after watching another woman pour wine on his pregnant wife, his first response was to blame me. "I came because you told me to come." I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You said this dinner was important." He exhaled sharply, the way he always did when he thought I was being unreasonable. "I said you could come if you wanted. I did not think you would actually show up." I stared at him, searching for some trace of the man I had married. The man who had promised to love and protect me. The man who had held my hand when we saw the first ultrasound of our baby. That man was gone. Maybe he had never existed at all. "Garrett," I whispered. "She just poured wine on me in front of everyone." He glanced at Sloane, then back at me. "She said you bumped into her." Maybe you were not watching where you were going. I did not bump into her. She walked up to me and deliberately poured her drink on my dress. I am covered in wine. I am 7 months pregnant, and you are asking me what I am doing here for a moment. Something flickered in his eyes, a hint of the man I used to know, but it disappeared as quickly as it had come, replaced by a cold calculation. You need to calm down, he said. You are making a scene. The words hit me like a physical blow. I had expected many things from tonight, but hearing my husband dismiss my humiliation as making a scene was worse than the wine itself. Sloane appeared at his side, sliding her arm through his in a gesture that was both intimate and deliberately provocative. She is overwhelmed, she said sweetly. Pregnancy hormones. You know how it is. I watched my husband accept her touch. I watched him stand beside his mistress while his wife dripped wine onto the floor. I watched him choose, right there in front of everyone. And something inside me went very still. Susan, the waitress, stepped forward again. Ma'am, the manager would like to speak with you. We have everything on our security cameras, and we want to make sure you are all right. Before I could respond, Garrett cut in. That will not be necessary. My wife is fine. We will handle this privately. The waitress hesitated, looking between us. Sir, she was assaulted. We have protocols. She was not assaulted. Garrett's voice hardened. It was an accident, and I would appreciate it if you would mind your own business. Susan flinched but stood her ground. I saw what happened, sir. It did not look like an accident. For a moment, I felt a surge of hope. Maybe this would be easier than I thought. Maybe the witnesses and the cameras would be enough. Maybe I would not need Declan after all. Garrett turned to Sloane, his voice dropping to a murmur. We should go. Sloane nodded. But before they could move, I spoke. Where are we going, Garrett? He looked at me with barely concealed contempt. You are going home. I have a business to discuss with Sloane. I will deal with you later. Deal with me, like I was a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. Garrett, I said carefully, I think we should talk about this. About everything. There is nothing to talk about. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I am going to call you a car. Go home, clean yourself up, and we will discuss this in the morning. I stood there in my wine-soaked dress, watching my husband arrange my dismissal like he was scheduling a business meeting. The restaurant had started to return to normal around us, conversations resuming in hushed tones, silverware clicking against plates again. But I knew that nothing was normal. Everything had changed, and there was no going back. I understand, I said quietly. Good. He barely looked at me as he typed something into his phone. The car will be here in 10 minutes. As I turned to leave, Susan, the waitress, caught my eye. She pressed something into my hand, a business card with a handwritten number on the back. If you need anything, she whispered, a place to stay, someone to talk to, call me. I looked at her. This stranger who showed me more kindness in 5 minutes than my husband had shown in years. Thank you, I said. I will remember this. I walked toward the exit, leaving a trail of wine droplets on the marble floor behind me. I did not look back at Garrett and her Sloane. I did not acknowledge the stares of the other diners, but I did not go home. I stood on the sidewalk outside Belle Vista, still wearing my wine-stained dress, trying to figure out my next move. The evening air was cool against my damp skin, carrying the sounds of Manhattan traffic and distant conversations. I had planned for many scenarios, but I had not planned for this level of public humiliation. My carefully constructed timeline was falling apart. I needed to regroup, to think, to figure out how to proceed. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Enjoy your evening. Maddie, the penthouse bed is so comfortable tonight. Sloane, she had somehow gotten my number. Or maybe Garrett had given it to her. Either way, the message was clear. She was not just content to humiliate me in public. She wanted to grind the victory into my soul. I deleted the message and opened my banking app. I needed to know exactly how much money I had access to. Needed to make sure I could afford a hotel room for the night while I regrouped. The app loaded. I stared at the screen, not understanding what I was seeing. $0. Every account I had access to showed a zero balance. Checking, savings, the emergency fund I had built during my journalism career. All of it was gone. My heart started pounding. This was not possible. I had checked the accounts this morning. There had been over $40,000 in the emergency fund alone. I tried my credit cards. Declined. All of them. Garrett, he had frozen everything. While I was standing in the restaurant dripping wine, while I was walking to the exit trying to maintain my dignity, he had been systematically cutting me off from every financial resource I had. This was the first catastrophe. I hailed a taxi anyway, giving the driver our penthouse address. Maybe if I could get home, get my important documents, the backup drives where I had stored copies of my evidence, I could still salvage something from this disaster. The drive across Manhattan felt endless. Every red light stretched into eternity. Every block that passed increased my anxiety. By the time we reached my building, I was barely holding myself together. I paid the driver with the only cash I had, $23 I had tucked into my purse this morning. Then I walked toward the entrance, already reaching for my key card. The doorman stepped in front of me. His name was Thomas, and he had worked in this building for 15 years. He had helped me carry groceries, had congratulated me when I got pregnant, had always greeted me with a warm smile. Tonight, his expression was apologetic and uncomfortable. "Mrs. Ashford," he said quietly, "I am sorry, I have been instructed not to let you enter the building." I stared at him. "What, Thomas? I live here." "I know, ma'am." He could not meet my eyes, but Mr. Ashford called about an hour ago. He said you are no longer a resident, and he requested that your belongings be packed and brought down to the lobby. For a moment, I could not breathe. I looked past him and saw them. Boxes, stacked near the concierge desk, my clothes, my books, my personal items, everything I owned, packed up and discarded like garbage. This was the second catastrophe. "Thomas, please. I am 7 months pregnant. I have nowhere to go." His face crumpled with sympathy, but he did not move. "I am sorry. Mrs. Ashford, I truly am." But Mr. Ashford made it very clear. "If I let you in, I will lose my job." I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to pound on the glass doors until someone let me in. But I was standing on a Manhattan sidewalk in a wine-stained dress with $23 to my name and a baby growing inside me. I had to be smarter than this. "Thank you for telling me, Thomas," I said, forcing my voice to remain calm. "Can I at least take my boxes?" "Of course, ma'am." He moved aside, relief flooding his features. "Take whatever you need." I walked to the pile of boxes and started searching. My laptop, my backup drives, my important documents, anything that could help me. They were not there. The boxes contained clothes, toiletries, a few books, nothing important, nothing I could use. Garrett had taken everything. I was still standing there, frozen, when a man in a dark suit approached me, Mrs. Madeline Ashford. I turned to face him. Yes, he handed me a manila envelope. "You have been served." My hands trembled as I opened it. Divorce papers, filed that morning. The grounds cited were erratic behavior, emotional instability, and suspected substance abuse. Attached were documents from a doctor I had never seen, claiming I had tested positive for controlled substances during a prenatal visit. This was the third catastrophe. The papers included an emergency motion for temporary custody of our unborn child, claiming I was an unfit mother and a danger to myself and others. The hearing was scheduled for 72 hours from now. I sank down onto one of my boxes, the divorce papers crumpling in my grip. 72 hours. I had 72 hours to find a lawyer, gather evidence, and prove I was not the unstable addict Garrett was painting me to be. I had no money, no home, no access to my evidence, and no one to help me. The doorman watched me with pity. The process server walked away without looking back. Cars rushed past on the street, their headlights blurring through the tears I could no longer hold back. I pulled out my phone and opened my contacts. There was one number I had not called in 3 years. One person who might still answer despite everything that had happened between us. I pressed the call button and waited, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice I had not heard in years. "Madeline Declan," I whispered. "I need help." There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was calm and controlled, the way it always was when things got serious. Where are you? I am on East 73rd Street, in front of my building. Garrett locked me out. Another pause. Shorter this time. Do not move. I will be there in 20 minutes. Declan, I am so sorry for everything I said, for not listening. We will talk about that later. He said, right now, the only thing that matters is getting you safe. Stay where you are. I am coming. The line went dead. I sat on my box of belongings, clutching my phone, and for the first time all night, I allowed myself to feel hope. True to his word, Declan arrived in exactly 19 minutes. A black SUV pulled up to the curb, and the man who stood out was both familiar and changed. 3 years had added silver threads to his dark hair. New lines creased the corners of his eyes, but his posture was the same, that coiled readiness that came from his years as a Navy SEAL. He moved like someone who was always prepared for danger. He stopped in front of me, taking in the wine stains on my dress, the boxes of belongings, the defeated slump of my shoulders. Something flickered in his expression. Anger, concern, a fierce protectiveness that reminded me of our childhood. Then he crouched down so we were eye level, and his voice was surprisingly gentle. You look terrible, he said. Despite everything, I almost laughed. You came. You sent me evidence of federal crimes. Did you think I would not? He straightened up and extended his hand to help me stand. I took it, feeling the strength in his grip, the calluses on his palm from years of physical work. Let me look at you. He studied my face, then my belly. Are you hurt? Did he touch you? Not physically. I pressed my hand against my stomach. The baby is fine. Good. We will worry about everything else later. He turned to one of his men, a large man in a dark jacket who had emerged from the driver's side of the SUV. Marcus, load up her boxes. Everything goes with us. Yes, sir. Declan guided me toward the vehicle, one hand on my elbow. His touch was careful, almost reverent, like he was afraid I might break. Declan, wait, I need to tell you what happened. You can tell me when we are somewhere safe. He opened the back door of the SUV. For now, get in the car. I climbed inside, sinking into the leather seats with the exhaustion I had been fighting all night. The interior was cool and quiet, insulated from the noise of the city outside. Marcus finished loading my bombs into the back and slid into the driver's seat. Declan sat beside me. Go, he said to Marcus. Take us to the Blackwell site on 52nd. The SUV pulled away from the curb. I watched my building disappear in the rearview mirror, trying to process the reality that I would never go back there again. Blackwell site, I asked. My company maintains several secure locations throughout the city. You will stay at one of them until we figure out our next move. I turned to face him. Your company, Blackwell Security Group. We handle intelligence and security for Fortune 500 companies, background checks, threat assessment, and corporate investigations. He paused. I built it after I left the service. I did not know. Garrett never mentioned it. Declan's jaw tightened. Garrett knew exactly what I did. That is why he worked so hard to keep you away from me. The realization hit me like a physical blow. All those years of Garrett subtly discouraging my relationship with my brother, all those comments about how Declan was too intense, too controlling, too involved in my life. He had been systematically isolating me from the one person who might have seen through his facade. I should have listened to you, I said quietly, at the wedding, when you tried to warn me. Yes, you should have. His voice was hard, but then he sighed. But you did not, and we cannot change that now. What matters is what we do next. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a tablet. This is what you sent me. I have had my team analyzing it for the past 24 hours. The screen showed financial documents, phone records, email chains, evidence I had spent months gathering. It is comprehensive. Declan continued. Bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, wire transfers to shell companies, securities fraud that would make the SEC foam at the mouth. He looked at me with something like respect. How did you get all this? I was an investigative journalist before I met Garrett. I still remember how to dig. You did more than dig. You built a case that could destroy him. For the first time that night, I felt something like pride. I knew it would not be enough just to leave him. I needed leverage. The SUV turned onto a quieter street and pulled into an underground parking garage. Marcus navigated through several security checkpoints before stopping in front of an elevator. Declan helped me out of the car. The apartment upstairs is fully equipped. Kitchen, bedroom, office space. You can stay as long as you need. The elevator opened onto a spacious apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. It was modern and clean. Nothing like the ornate penthouse Garrett had filled with expensive art and antique furniture. It felt like the first breath of fresh air I had taken in years. "You will be safe here," Declan said. "The building has 24-hour security, and only my most trusted people know this location." I sank into a chair by the window, suddenly exhausted. "What happens now? Now we plan." He pulled a chair for it to sit across from me. "Garrett has moved faster than I expected. The divorce filing, the custody motion, locking you out of your accounts. He has been preparing for this." "For how long?" Declan's expression darkened. "Based on what I found, at least 18 months. 18 months. Nearly the entire time I had been pregnant." "There is something else," Declan continued. "You are not his first wife." "I know. Rebecca. They divorced 5 years ago. She was not his first either." He leaned forward. "Garrett has been married 3 times before you, Madeline. And every single one of those marriages ended the same way. The wife discovered his affairs. The wife tried to leave. And the wife ended up penniless, discredited, and alone." I felt the blood drain from my face. 3 times he has a pattern. He finds women who are successful, independent, driven. Then he slowly isolates them from their support systems. He makes them dependent on him financially. And when they try to leave, he destroys them. "But I have evidence. Real evidence." "So did they." Declan's voice was grim. "But Garrett has powerful friends. Judges, prosecutors, journalists. He knows exactly how to manipulate the system. Then what chance do I have?" Declan smiled. And for the first time, it reached his eyes. "You have something they did not have. You have me. And I do not play by the same rules Garrett does." 3 days of hope. That was all I got before everything collapsed again. Declan's team worked around the clock. They verified my evidence, contacted securities attorneys, began building a case that would expose Garrett's financial crimes. I spent hours in the secure apartment, answering questions, reviewing documents, feeling like I was finally taking control of my life. By the second day, we had a plan. Declan would leak selected information to a financial journalist he trusted. The SEC would receive an anonymous tip, and I would file a counter-motion in the custody case, supported by evidence of Garrett's fraud and manipulation. By this time next week, I told myself, Garrett will wish he never met me. I was wrong. On the 3rd morning, I woke to the sound of Declan's voice, sharp and urgent, coming from the living room. I wrapped a robe around myself and followed the sound. He was on the phone, pacing in front of the windows. His posture radiated tension. "What do you mean?" "Investigation." He paused, listening. "Since when?" He paused again. "That is not possible. Those records are sealed." I watched, fear growing in my chest. When he hung up, his expression was darker than I had ever seen it. "What happened?" Declan ran a hand through his hair. "Someone tipped off the federal government that Blackwell's security group has been conducting illegal surveillance on American citizens." "That is not true." "No, it is not." He turned to face me. "But it does not matter. The investigation will take months to resolve. In the meantime, my security clearances are suspended. My contracts with government agencies are frozen, and half my staff are being pulled in for questioning. The implications hit me immediately. Your resources? Gone. At least temporarily." He walked to the window, staring out at the city. "Garrett did this. He found out I was helping you, and he made a call to someone in Washington who owed him a favor. My phone buzzed, a text from a blocked number. Your brother cannot help you now. I have friends everywhere. Come home and we can discuss this like civilized people." Garrett, always so confident, always so sure he held all the cards. "There is more," Declan said quietly. "I got a call from Dr. Crawford this morning. Dr. Crawford was my obstetrician, the one person I thought was completely separate from all of this. Someone accessed your medical records." He continued, "They have been altered. The file now shows notes about mood instability, paranoid behavior, and suspected substance abuse during pregnancy." I felt the room tilt. "That is not possible. Dr. Crawford would never write those things. She did not. Declan turned to face me, but someone with administrative access to the hospital system did, and the changes were made to look like they came from her account. My legs suddenly felt weak. I sank onto the nearest chair, my hands shaking. So now there is documentation, medical documentation, supporting Garrett's claim that I am unstable. Yes, and your company is under investigation. So you cannot help me gather counter evidence. Not through official channels. I pressed my hands against my belly, feeling the baby kick. She was active this morning, moving constantly, as if she sensed my distress. The custody hearing is in 48 hours. I said, I have no money, no home, and now my own medical records say I am an unfit mother. What am I supposed to do? Declan did not answer immediately. He walked over and sat across from me, taking my hands in his. Listen to me carefully. Madeline, this is not over. It feels over. That is what he wants you to feel. He designed this situation specifically to make you feel hopeless. But you are not hopeless. You are a woman who spent 3 months gathering evidence while pretending to be oblivious. You are a journalist who built a career on exposing people like Garrett. You are my sister. I looked up at him through blurred eyes. We are not giving up, he continued. We are going to adapt. We are going to find another way. How Dr. Crawford is on our side. The alterations to your records were clumsy. She has already noticed discrepancies and is documenting everything. The restaurant manager filed a police report about the assault. Susan, the waitress who helped you, has agreed to be a witness. He squeezed my hands. Garrett thinks he has won because he cut off the obvious paths, but there are always other paths. For a moment, I almost believed him. But the weight of everything that had happened pressed down on me like a physical force. Declan, he has been doing this for years, to multiple women, and he has won every single time. Because those women were alone, Declan's voice hardened. You are not alone. A knock on the apartment door made us both tense. Declan stood, reaching automatically for his hip where I knew he kept a concealed weapon. Who is it, he called? NYPD. A voice responded. We have a warrant for Mrs. Madeline Ashford. The blood drained from my face. Declan gave me a look that said, stay calm, and walked to the door. He checked the peephole, then slowly opened it. 2 uniformed officers stood in the hallway, accompanied by a woman in a gray suit, Mrs. Ashford. The woman stepped forward. I am Dr. Patricia Hendricks from Manhattan Psychiatric Services. We have received a court order for an emergency psychiatric evaluation based on concerns about your mental stability and the safety of your unborn child. I stood frozen, unable to speak. This is based on fabricated medical records. Declan said firmly, my sister is not mentally unstable. Sir, that will be determined by the evaluation. Dr. Hendricks's voice was professionally neutral. Mrs. Ashford, you can come voluntarily, or the officers can take you into custody. I would strongly recommend the former. I looked at Declan, terror rising in my chest. If they took me to a psychiatric facility, I would miss the custody hearing. Garrett would win by default. You cannot do this, I whispered. Dr. Hendricks's expression did not change. I am afraid we can. The court order is valid, and the concerns documented in your medical file are serious. This is for your own protection, and for the protection of your baby. The officer stepped forward. I felt Declan tense beside me, and for a terrible moment I thought he might do something that would make everything worse. Declan, I said softly, do not. His jaw clenched, but he stepped back. The officers took my arms, gently but firmly. As they led me toward the door, I looked back at my brother. Find another way, I said. He nodded once. I will. The door closed behind me, and just like that, I was gone. The psychiatric facility was clean and quiet. Too clean, too quiet. The kind of sterile environment designed to make you question whether your own emotions were valid. They put me in a private room on the 3rd floor. White walls, white sheets, a window with bars that they called safety measures. A nurse took my phone, my jewelry, and anything else I might use to hurt myself. As she put it, I was not going to hurt myself. I was going to hurt Garrett, but I did not tell her that. The first 12 hours were the worst. I paced the small room, counting the tiles on the floor, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. 3 months of planning, 3 months of careful evidence gathering, and Garrett had dismantled it all in 3 days. A doctor came to see me in the evening, Dr. Robert Matthews, according to his badge. He was an older man with gray hair and kind eyes, but I knew better than to trust kindness in this place. Mrs. Ashford, he said, sitting down across from me, I want to help you, but I need you to be honest with me about what you have been experiencing. I have been experiencing my husband trying to destroy my life. Does that count? He made a note on his clipboard. I see here that you believe your husband is conspiring against you. Can you tell me more about that? It is not a belief. I have evidence. I gathered it myself. Another note. And do you believe that others are involved in this conspiracy? The doctors who treated you, the legal system. They altered my medical records. Someone with access to the hospital system changed my file to make me look unstable. Dr. Matthews looked at me with an expression I recognized. The careful neutrality of someone who thinks you are delusional but does not want to trigger you. Mrs. Ashford, he said gently, I understand that this is a difficult time. You are pregnant, your marriage is ending, and you are under enormous stress. Sometimes, under these conditions, our minds can play tricks on us. My mind is not playing tricks. I was an investigative journalist. I know how to verify information. I know how to build a case. He made another note. And your brother, who runs a private security company, does he support these beliefs? My brother has seen the evidence himself. The evidence that you gathered while you believed you were being watched. I never said I was being watched, but you did gather evidence secretly over several months. Without your husband's knowledge, I stared at him, realizing the trap. Everything I said would be twisted to support their narrative. Every reasonable action I had taken would be reframed as paranoid behavior. I would like to speak to a lawyer, I said. Of course, you have that right. He closed his clipboard. But I want you to know that I am here to help you, not hurt you. If you are willing to work with us, we can get through this evaluation quickly and have you released. Released when the standard evaluation period is 72 hours. After that, we will make a determination about your mental state and your ability to care for yourself and your baby. 72 hours. The custody hearing was in less than 48. I cannot be here for 72 hours, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I have a court hearing. I am aware, Dr. Matthews stood up, but your mental health must take priority. The court will be notified of your situation, and the hearing will be postponed until you are cleared for release. Postponed, not canceled. But by the time I got out of here, Garrett would have had days to consolidate his position, to build his case, to convince a judge that I was exactly the unstable woman he claimed I was. The doctor left, and I was alone again. That night, I lay in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. The baby moved restlessly inside me, responding to my anxiety. I placed both hands on my stomach and tried to breathe slowly, tried to send calm thoughts to my daughter. We are going to be okay, I whispered. I promise you, we are going to be okay. But I did not know if that was true. Morning came slowly. A nurse brought me breakfast, bland oatmeal and fruit that I could barely force myself to eat. Another doctor came for another evaluation. More questions designed to make me sound paranoid. More careful notes on more clipboards. By the afternoon of the second day, I had almost given up hope. Then a nurse I did not recognize came to my room. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with dark skin and braids pulled back in a neat bun. Her name tag read Jennifer, Mrs. Ashford. She glanced over her shoulder, then stepped inside and closed the door. Someone asked me to give you this. She pressed something into my hand, a magazine, the kind they left in waiting rooms. But there was something tucked inside the pages, a small piece of paper. Folded twice, I looked up at her, but she was already leaving. I opened the note with trembling fingers. The handwriting was Declan's. Keep quiet. Play along. 48 hours. Do not trust anyone except Jennifer. We are coming. I read the note 3 times, then tore it into tiny pieces and flushed it down the toilet. Declan was still out there. He had not given up. He had found a way to reach me even inside this facility. For the first time in days, I felt something besides despair. I felt hope. But I also knew that hope was dangerous. Garrett had given me hope before, had made me believe that things would get better, that our marriage could be saved, that he truly loved me. And every time, That hope had been crushed. This time would be different, and it had to be different. I placed my hands on my belly again, feeling my daughter kick. 48 hours. I whispered, we just have to hold on for 48 more hours. Let me tell you what Declan was doing while I was locked in that psychiatric facility. Because while I was lying in bed, staring at white walls, and answering questions designed to make me look crazy, my brother was waging a war. The moment I was taken from the apartment, he made 3 phone calls. The first was to Dr. Catherine Pierce, a forensic psychiatrist who specialized in cases involving falsified mental health records. She owed Declan a favor from a case 3 years ago, and she agreed to review my file without hesitation. The second was to Detective Morrison, a decorated officer with the NYPD who had worked with Blackwell Security on several corporate investigations. Morrison was not officially involved in my case, but he knew people who were, more importantly, he had a reputation for despising men who abused their wives. The third call was to a journalist named Elizabeth Hartley. She worked for a major financial publication and had been trying to get dirt on Garrett Ashford for years. She had never had enough evidence to publish. Until now, Declan sent her everything I had gathered: bank statements, wire transfers, shell company documentation, phone records, emails. You have 48 hours, he told her. After that, the story goes to someone else. Elizabeth worked through the night. By morning, she had verified enough of the evidence to convince her editors that this was real. They assigned 2 additional reporters to the story and began making calls. Meanwhile, Dr. Pierce reviewed my medical records. It took her less than 4 hours to find the discrepancies. These alterations are amateur work, she told Declan. The timestamps do not match. The language is inconsistent with standard medical terminology. And the original entries are still visible in the backup system. Someone with administrative access made these changes, but they did not know how to hide their tracks. Can you prove it? I can prove that the records were altered after the fact. I can prove that the alterations do not match the original clinical notes. And I can prove that Mrs. Ashford showed no signs of mental instability during any of her documented medical visits. While Dr. Pierce built her case, Detective Morrison was doing some investigating of his own. He pulled the restaurant security footage from the night of the assault. He obtained statements from Susan the waitress and 2 other staff members who had witnessed Sloan pour wine on me. Then he started digging into Garrett's past. The first wife, Rebecca, had filed a police report during their divorce. Harassment, stalking, threats. The report had been buried, never acted upon. Morrison found it in the archives. The second wife, a woman named Carolyn, whose existence I had never known about, had tried to get a restraining order. The request had been denied after a judge ruled that her claims were exaggerated. Morrison found out that the judge had received a substantial campaign donation from one of Garrett's business associates 2 months before the ruling. The third wife had simply disappeared, moved across the country, changed her name, refused to talk to anyone about what had happened. Morrison eventually tracked her down through old DMV records. Her statement, given over the phone with a trembling voice, was devastating. He took everything from me, my money, my career, my reputation. By the time I got out, I had nothing. The only reason I survived was because I ran. Declan compiled all of this into a dossier. Evidence of a pattern, evidence of systematic abuse, evidence that Garrett Ashford had been destroying women for years and getting away with it. The final piece came from an unexpected source. Sloan Whitmore had made a mistake. In her arrogance, she had bragged to a friend about her plans to become the next Mrs. Ashford, about how easy it was to manipulate Garrett, about how pathetic I was, crying in that restaurant while she poured wine on my designer dress. That friend, it turned out, did not like Sloan as much as Sloan thought. She had recorded the conversation and was more than happy to share it with Declan's people. The recording was damning. Sloan described the assault in detail, laughing about how helpless I had looked. She talked about the falsified medical records, about the judge who was friendly with Garrett, about the plan to have me committed and stripped of custody. She had no idea she was building the case that would destroy her. On the morning of my 3rd day in the psychiatric facility, Declan put everything into motion. Dr. Pierce filed a formal complaint with the state medical board, alleging falsification of patient records. Detective Morrison presented his evidence to the district attorney's office, requesting that charges be filed against Sloan for assault and Garrett for conspiracy. Elizabeth Hartley published her story, Hedge Fund CEO's Pattern of Abuse. 3 women tell their stories. It went viral within hours, and Jennifer the nurse walked into my room with a message. Pack your things. Mrs. Ashford, an independent psychiatrist, has reviewed your case and determined that there is no basis for your continued commitment. You are being released immediately. I stared at her, hardly believing what I was hearing. She smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen in 3 days. Your brother is waiting downstairs. Declan was waiting in the lobby. Just as Jennifer had said, he stood near the reception desk, dressed in a dark suit, looking every bit the dangerous man the world believed him to be. When he saw me walking toward him, something in his expression shifted. Relief, pride, love. He crossed the distance between us in 3 long strides and wrapped his arms around me, careful not to squeeze too hard because of my belly. Are you okay? His voice was rough against my hair. I will be, I said, thanks to you. He pulled back and looked at me, his hands on my shoulders. We need to talk. A lot has happened while you were in there. He led me outside to the waiting SUV. Marcus was behind the wheel again, and another man I did not recognize sat in the passenger seat. Where are we going? I asked as we pulled away from the facility. My office. We have a press conference in 2 hours, and you need to be prepared. A press conference? Declan smiled grimly. Elizabeth Hartley's article went live this morning. It is the biggest story in the financial world right now. 3 women coming forward with their experiences, documentation of fraud, evidence of systematic abuse. He paused. And now you are going to tell your story. I felt a flutter of fear in my chest. In public, I know it is terrifying, but this is the only way. Garrett has spent years controlling the narrative, manipulating judges and journalists, burying evidence. The only way to beat him is to make it impossible to bury. The drive across Manhattan felt surreal. I watched the city pass by through the tinted windows, trying to process everything that had happened. 3 days ago, I had been committed to a psychiatric facility, convinced that Garrett had won. Now I was about to face the world. Declan's office was in a converted warehouse in Chelsea. The building was modern and secure, with multiple checkpoints and cameras monitoring every angle. Inside, a team of people was waiting. Dr. Catherine Pierce was there, ready to testify about the falsified medical records. Detective Morrison was present, along with a representative from the district attorney's office. Susan, the waitress, stood in the corner, looking nervous but determined, and Elizabeth Hartley sat at a conference table, surrounded by notes and documents. Mrs. Ashford, Elizabeth stood to shake my hand. I have read everything your brother provided. I want you to know that this story is going to change things, not just for you, but for every woman Garrett has hurt. Thank you for believing me. She smiled. I have been investigating him for years. I always knew there was something wrong. I just never had enough proof. She glanced at Declan. Your brother gave me everything I needed. The next hour was a whirlwind of preparation. Lawyers briefed me on what I could and could not say. Elizabeth walked me through the likely questions from reporters. Dr. Pierce explained the medical evidence in terms the public could understand. And then it was time. The press conference was held in a hotel ballroom downtown. When I walked in, flanked by Declan and the legal team, the room erupted in camera flashes and shouted questions. I took my place behind a podium bristling with microphones. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding. But when I looked out at the sea of reporters, I felt something unexpected. Strength. My name is Madeline Ashford, I began, and I am here to tell you about the man I married. I spoke for nearly 30 minutes. I told them about the gaslighting, the isolation, the systematic destruction of my financial independence. I told them about the night at the restaurant when Sloan Whitmore poured wine on me while my husband watched. I told them about being locked out of my home, served with falsified divorce papers, and committed to a psychiatric facility based on fabricated medical records. I told them everything. When I finished, the room was silent. Then the questions started. Mrs. Ashford, what do you say to claims that your evidence was obtained illegally? Every piece of evidence I gathered is legally admissible. I was a journalist. I know how to build a case. What do you hope to achieve with this press conference? I want other women to know they are not alone. And I want Garrett to understand that he cannot silence me anymore. Do you believe your husband belongs in prison? I believe he belongs wherever the justice system decides to put him, but I also believe that justice has been denied to his previous victims. I am here to make sure it is not denied again. The questions continued for another 20 minutes. When it was over, Declan guided me away from the podium and into a private room. "You did well," he said quietly. I sank into a chair, exhausted. "What happens now? Now we wait. The SEC has opened an investigation. The district attorney is considering our charges, and Garrett's investors are panicking." As if on cue, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and a slow smile spread across his face. What I asked. That was my contact at Garrett's firm. He looked up at me. "The board of directors just called an emergency meeting. They are voting to remove him as CEO. I closed my eyes, letting the relief wash over me. It was not over yet. There would be court battles and legal proceedings and months of uncertainty. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was winning. Declan sat down beside me and took my hand. "I am proud of you, Maddie." I opened my eyes and looked at him. "I could not have done this without you." "Yes, you could have." He squeezed my hand. "You are stronger than you know. You always have been." 2 months later, I sat in a small apartment in Brooklyn, watching the evening news. The anchor was discussing the latest developments in what the media had started calling the Ashford scandal. Former hedge fund CEO Garrett Ashford III pleaded guilty today to multiple counts of securities fraud and conspiracy. As part of his plea agreement, Ashford will serve 8 years in federal prison and forfeit over $200 million in illegally obtained assets. I turned off the television and looked around my new home. It was small compared to the penthouse. 1 bedroom, a modest kitchen, a living room that doubled as my home office. The furniture was simple, most of it purchased from second-hand stores during the weeks after I was released from the psychiatric facility. But it was mine, every inch of it, paid for with my own money, earned from the freelance journalism work I had started doing again. A soft sound came from the nursery. I stood and walked down the short hallway, pushing open the door to find my daughter stirring in her crib. "Hello, sweet girl." I reached down and lifted her into my arms. Her name was Hope, not because I was sentimental, but because I wanted to remind myself every day of what I had almost lost. She was 6 weeks old now, born 3 weeks after my press conference. The delivery had been uncomplicated, the labor surprisingly quick. Declan had been in the waiting room, along with Dr. Crawford and Susan the waitress, who had become something like a friend over the past 2 months. When the nurse placed Hope in my arms for the first time, I cried. Not from pain or fear, but from a joy so overwhelming it felt like drowning in light. Now I carried her to the window and looked out at the Brooklyn skyline. It was evening, and the lights of the city were beginning to flicker on, creating a tapestry of yellow and white against the darkening sky. "Let me tell you what happened to everyone else," I whispered to Hope, because someday she would want to know the whole story. Garrett was sentenced 2 weeks ago, 8 years in federal prison. His assets were frozen, his reputation destroyed, his carefully constructed empire reduced to rubble. The other women he had victimized, Rebecca and Carolyn and the woman who had changed her name, they all testified at his sentencing hearing. Their words were devastating. Sloan Whitmore received 18 months for assault, filing false statements, and conspiracy. She tried to turn on Garrett at the end, tried to claim she was a victim too, but the recording her friend had made destroyed any chance of sympathy. She would serve her time in a minimum security facility upstate. The hospital administrator who had allowed the falsification of my medical records lost his license. The judge who had denied Carolyn's restraining order years ago was facing an ethics investigation. The network of corruption that had protected Garrett for so long was finally being exposed. As for me, I received full custody of Hope. The divorce settlement gave me the penthouse, which I sold immediately, along with a substantial portion of Garrett's legitimate assets. I did not need his money, but I took it anyway. Not for myself, but for our daughter. I also resumed my journalism career. My first article, published 2 weeks after Hope was born, was titled "How I Survived: A Journalist's Guide to Documenting Domestic Financial Abuse." It went viral. Within a month, I had more freelance offers than I could handle. There was a knock at the door. I settled Hope back in her crib and went to answer it. Declan stood in the hallway holding a bottle of wine and a small stuffed elephant. "I brought reinforcements," he said. I stepped aside to let him in. The elephant is for Hope. Obviously, the wine is for you. He walked into the living room and set the bottle on the kitchen counter. How are you feeling? Better. Every day is a little bit better. He nodded, studying my face with those sharp eyes that never missed anything. You look good. Maddie, stronger. I feel stronger. I walked to the window again, looking out at the city. A year ago, I would not have believed any of this was possible. I would have stayed with Garrett forever, convinced that I deserved the way he treated me. What changed? I found the burner phone. I found out about Sloan, and something inside me snapped. I turned to face my brother, not in a bad way, in a good way, like I finally woke up. Declan was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, that rare, genuine smile that I had not seen often enough over the past 3 years. I am glad you woke up, he said. I missed you. I missed you too. I crossed the room and hugged him, the way I should have hugged him at my wedding 3 years ago when he tried to warn me. I am sorry I did not listen. You were in love. He hugged me back. Love makes us blind to all kinds of things. The baby monitor crackled. Hope was stirring again, making the soft sounds that meant she would want to be fed soon. I should go get her, I said. Declan released me and stepped back. I will open the wine. You do what you need to do. I walked back to the nursery and lifted my daughter into my arms. She looked up at me with ears that were still finding their color, and for a moment, I felt that overwhelming wave of love again. You are going to grow up knowing the truth. I whispered to her about your father, about what happened, about everything, and you are going to know that your mother fought for you, that she never gave up. Hope cooed softly as if she understood. I carried her back to the living room, where Declan had poured 2 glasses of wine and settled into the comfortable chair by the window. The city lights glittered behind him, beautiful and full of promise. To new beginnings, he said, raising his glass. I sat down across from him, hope cradled against my chest, and lifted my own glass. To new beginnings. I took a sip and let the warmth spread through me. Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside, my daughter breathed softly against my shoulder. My brother watched over us both, a guardian who would never let anything hurt us again. He thought pouring wine on me would break me. He did not know that every drop was evidence. Every insult was recorded, and every threat was one step closer to his own destruction. Some women survived by running. I survived by watching, waiting, and striking when he thought he had already won. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic abuse or financial coercion, resources are available. You are not alone.